Okay, good morning all, and welcome to the last Green Heat and Greenspaces event. This one is focused on the use of the data outputs from the project. So we've already previously run an event on our findings, which was recorded, which you can find on the GHiGs webpage. So this one is looking specifically at the data issues and how the data fits in the wider data framework from Scottish Government. And we have three other presenters this morning. We have my collaborator, Ruth Bush from Ramboll, who we've been working with on our ParkPower program over the last 2 years. So she's going to talk about some issues around energy master planning. We've got Hugh Muschamp from Fife Council, who many of you will know as well, who is involved in the Fife Climate Action Plan at present, and he's going to talk a little bit about how he sees this data being applied from a local authority perspective. And then towards the end of the presentation, Simon Roberts from the Improvement Service is going to talk a little bit about their Spatial Data Hub and how the data from GHiGs can be accessed through that. So Simon will give us 10 minutes nearer the end. Okay, so as Lynn said, this event is being recorded, and I hope that's okay with everybody. We've had lots of inquiries for being able to watch it on sort of catch up, so that's what we're planning to do. And it's a bit of a last hurrah for me as well, because I think publicly, I think it's just going out that I'm going to be moving on from Greenspace Scotland to a new role with Locogen. So this in the next couple of weeks. So it's great to have an opportunity to say thank you to everybody who's been involved in the GHiGs project, and to sort of finally sign off on the last thing that I really wanted to do with GHiGs, which was to try and empower people with some knowledge of our data and what we've actually produced. So with that, if we go to the next slide, please, Lynn, I'll just take you through the plan for this morning. This is an hour-and-a-half session. So we're going to just run through a quick introduction of where GHiGs has delivered the sort of outputs that it's produced. We've then got a chunk of about 10 or 15 minutes to talk about exactly what data we've produced and made available. And thanks to all the partners involved, there was about 15, 16 core partners, largely local authorities across Scotland, and they all came together and said, yes, let's make this data nationally available. So even though they've contributed some funds into the pot, they were happy to try and see the bigger picture and how it could be benefited, how the data could benefit the wider community. So really pleased about that, and thank you to them for that decision. So all the data is national, Scotland-wide data. So we're hoping that it will be very very much usable for some of the strategic agendas that Hugh's going to talk about as well. Then we've got a session on how the data can be used and the sort of questions that it can answer. That's really the core of today's presentation, and give you some examples of the sorts of things that we've been doing with it, either ourselves or with our partners. And then finally, how some sort of more practical issues around how it can be accessed, who can use it, some of the data quality issues that we're available, and then hopefully there should be a submit some question slot in about 10 minutes time. Maybe use that to store up your questions and then submit them through the chat function on the right-hand side. Okay, next question. Next slide, please, Lynn. Okay, so these are the key outputs that we've produced from the GHiGs project so far. So we've got various reports, a national findings report. We've done 14 different local findings reports, one for each of the core partners. We've done a technical methodology report, so if there are bits around today that you would still like further clarification of, then you're likely to find some of the technical detail in that methodology report. We've done a mini report on the types of heat sources that are available for off-gas grid, off mains gas grid settlements across Scotland. So that's all of this is on our web page available for download. We've got a data guide that takes you through much of what we're going to talk about today in a little bit more detail. So do refer to that. We've got two dashboards. We call them map dashboards. They're really mapping tools that allow you to visualize the data that we've generated. So for anyone who doesn't feel confident or doesn't have access to GIS software and doesn't have the experience of that, then we refer you to using those dashboards. They're Scotland-wide. The settlements covers all the 516 settlements in Scotland. You can find out about any settlement, and likewise the Greenspaces has roughly 100,000 green spaces with data about each one of them. So that they're both available again publicly. Some of the data that we've collected is not accessible through those dashboards because they're publicly available. So they don't have everything on them. They've been generalized in some areas. So the data that we're talking about today does go into a bit more detail. And then the actual data themselves, or at least the GIS data themselves, is available through the Improvement Service Spatial Data Hub. Okay, next slide, please, Lynn. We've produced these infographics. So we've created, I think, 14 different infographics for each of the core partners. So this was one of the key outputs for them to summarize the results. So this one's for North Lanarkshire Council. So it's a nice way of communicating the results. Next one, Lynn. This is an example of the Greenspace dashboard. This you can find online. It's very easy to use. You just have to bear in mind the little map tool on the top left. You actually do have to click that before clicking on one of the Greenspaces to get information about each one. But it's a very detailed data set, as you can see, and covers the smallest, often the smallest sort of verges along roads, for example. We have taken out some of the smallest green spaces, but most of them are in there. So really is very detailed data. Next one, please, Lynn. And that's a settlements one, so that's the settlement Dundee. And again, the button on the top right of the map is a layers button, and you can switch on and switch off different layers. So we've switched on some heat density mapping there that allows you to see where the concentrations of heat density across Dundee are. And again, you can click on the settlement and produce a profile down the right-hand side of all sorts of data that we've collected relevant to low carbon heat agenda for individual settlements. Okay, next one, please. So taking that settlement, it takes about 2 minutes to generate just using sort of screenshots or cut and paste, standard sort of cut and paste functionality to create a sort of one-page profile, so for anywhere. So it's very easy to do, and there's an example for Hoik actually on our public GHiGs webpage. This one's for Oban, and it gives you data, as we said, about a sort of customizable map and various information about the viability of ground source and water source heat and various other low carbon data sets. So It's dead easy to do. So if you're looking to create profiles for settlements, then that's a really good way of doing it. Okay, next one, please. And this is the one we've done a little bit of work. Greener Hoik was a community energy or community sustainability body in the Borders, and they were in touch with us a couple of weeks ago. We're interested in looking at low carbon energy opportunities in Hoik, so we produced a one-page profile for them, and they found that useful. Next one, please. And we also produced some maps showing them the opportunities for public sector buildings and their heat demand in relation to the opportunity for water source heat, which is very significant in many Borders, Scottish Borders towns. So it was just in response really to an inquiry. But if that's the sort of thing that you get inquiries for, then hopefully there are some quick tools here that allow you to generate some nice outputs that you can feed to people. Okay, next one, please. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Hugh now to talk about the application of this data to local authorities.
Hi, thanks, John. So really, I just wanted to stress from a local authority officer perspective and just try to get some thoughts about what opportunities this data set gives us in this area. I think from a long period, we've had a partnership with Greenspace Scotland, trying to think about these opportunities. These data sets came out of some early energy master planning work that we did, and looking at, we knew what the energy demand was for the buildings, but where could we get that energy from? And when we're looking at all these new energy systems, where would they go? You know, and local Greenspaces looked at this really good opportunity to be a place to have these and also provide the green space function as well. So it's almost as this double benefit across that process. From a council's perspective, clearly the climate emergency is a major driver in Fife across all of us at the moment. And within that, this energy transition, which is going to needed to have all these new energy measures being brought in. It's a huge task. I mean, if you look at just the most recent Scottish Government sort of asks around that, looking at all off-gas buildings to be and 1 million on-gas homes to be decarbonised by 2030. Even within those numbers, a huge, vast number of buildings that we're looking at, not to say all the non-domestic and all our council buildings as well. So this thought, where can we put energy generation, where can we put pipes, cables, all these things, where can they go? And this data for us is a really practical way of looking at that opportunity. From a council and strategic plan terms, we've got a climate 5 plan, but we've also got things like the local development plan, where things might go, so zoning of areas, the local housing and transport strategy, green space plans going forward. But critically right now, the local heat and energy efficiency strategy, Scottish Government are asking us all to, and looking at doing a duty for that for local authorities. They're talking about these being in place by the end of 2023. And quite a few of the councils will have applied for the Scottish Government next stage of funding in terms of supporting that work. Fife Council was one of those. We've just got a funding offer come back through. So there's a huge amount of work in that. And again, this data is going to be really critical on that. So thinking about what the Green Heat in Green Spaces data gives us, this data, so we can so practical examples of how we use the data that John is describing through, but also this methodology process that as we go through, we're going to need to review and refresh this data as we learn more things and that sort of thing. So that there's both this side of stuff that there's the practical maps, but also this practical use of the data. So thinking about for you, and when you're listening to the next bit from my head is how are you going to use this data? Which colleagues you have in the council are going to want this data? Transport colleagues for EV, for housing colleagues, for asset colleagues, for green space colleagues looking for other income opportunities for green space, and making those connections so you've got those shared objectives for how we might use that data. Okay, John, that was my quick summary, I think, just to set this going.
Thanks, Hugh. That's great. this next one, please, Lynn. Yeah, there's really a pause here because we wanted to invite questions from you, invite initial thoughts before we've obviously gone through the whole thing. Whether there was some ideas that had come up that you were bringing to the webinar that you thought would be good to make a question, and we can store those up. So it's a sort of opportunity. What you, in fact you see on the screen there, just out of interest, is a solution that is used for thermal storage. So this is like a giant bath being buried in the ground for storing hot water. And the company that do this use this thermal store as a way of storing heat that you can generate in the summer in order to utilize in the winter. And they're using green spaces in urban areas in order to bury or find land in order to bury these thermal stores. So this is the sort of thing that's happening. It provides all sorts of flexibility into district heat networks that ensure they're more efficient, and they have access to sort of balancing the heat across seasons, and it's their sort of utilization of urban green space. So I thought it'd be interesting to show. But do submit any questions that you have to us through the chat function. If we get the chance to answer them through the course of the presentation, we'll address them as we go through, or we'll deal with them at the end. But yeah, please fire off any questions you have. Okay, next one, please, Lynn. So we have data that we're making available in two formats, really. The first is as GIS data, which those of you who work with GIS, and we're assuming that most of you probably are not GIS cool, in fact, far from it. So we're not going to make any assumptions about that at all, but they are available as in industry standard shapefiles, and they can be loaded into almost any GIS system that you might have, and there are freely available open source software, GIS software like QGIS, which is I use and is extremely good and powerful and stable. So if license fees are an issue, then I'd really definitely point you at that as a very good tool. But of course, there are other proprietary software out there like Esri ArcGIS for manipulating and analyzing this type of data. And as organizations, I'm sure many of you will have access or will have colleagues that use it. Often the issue is time for those GIS officers and getting their time to utilize for your project, and they can be very busy. So I'm well aware that getting GIS expertise for doing some of this work is challenging for many people. So we also wanted to make the data available in a sort of non-spatial way, with typical spatial descriptors. So we've done that through a largely one Excel file. Actually, we've just created an Excel file with lots of different worksheets in, and this again is available from the GHiGs webpage. In some cases, we've had to aggregate the data to avoid sensitivities with some of the data. So not all of it is accessible through an Excel file, whereas because of the Spatial Data Hub security security controls that they're able to provide, then we can make all the data available through the Spatial Data Hub. Anyway, we've made as much of it as we possibly can through the public GHiGs webpage in an Excel form for settlement, principally settlement and local authority scale data. Okay, I'll give you a few examples of that now. Lynn, please, next one. So this is the GIS data. These are most of the GIS layers that we've created. So we've got there's large numbers of attributes associated with these data layers, which are all described in detail in the data guide that I mentioned before. So we've got GIS Greenspace data, which I've shown you, very detailed. We've created a subset of that Greenspace data for those of you who want a smaller data set to manipulate more easily, which are really just the strategic green spaces that offer the most opportunity. So we've subsetted those ones. We've got a data set of all settlements that have, again, lots of attributes associated with those settlements. Public buildings and their heat demand. We've estimated which of the buildings are likely to be publicly owned based on OS coding of buildings. It's not the only way you can do it, and it's not necessarily perfect by any means, but it was the best that we could do within the resources of the project. And you can see the map there of Edinburgh is public buildings, symbolized by their heat demand. We've created a sort of merged a number of different data sets from OS to create what we're calling a static water bodies. So this is canals and lochs and small flooded quarries and pits and things like that, all of which we could use potentially as either thermal stores, as I talked about before, or as sources of waterborne heat. So that's available, and there didn't seem to be anything like that publicly available, so we created one. And we've created two sets of linear heat density models at 3 different threshold levels, one for all buildings and the second one for just the public buildings. So I don't have time necessarily today to go into the methodology behind linear heat density, or perhaps if that's a question for a number of people, then we can raise it in the Q&A. But the methodology document that we have explains how linear heat density models are created. The bottom line, it's a buffering technique that highlights areas that have the highest heat densities, not surprisingly. So if you're looking at an urban area and you want to understand which areas have the highest heat densities, then you can use these linear heat density models to identify those. And they're industry standard. They're being used in a very similar way in the LHEAS process to identify those areas. For identifying zoning areas that might be suitable for district heat networks. Okay, next slide, please. How do I find the Excel data that we talked about? Well, this is an extract of the GHiGs webpage that you'll find online. So it's the GHiGs National Findings Key Data Excel spreadsheet there. That's the one that you can download and find much of the data that I'm just subsequently going to be talking about. Next one, please, Lynn. So here's an extract of it, of one of the worksheets in that data set. So this is one summarizing all the settlements, but according to the local authority. So just bearing in mind, all our data is amidst rural areas. So anything outside a settlement of 500 population is not being covered. It's not part of our project at all. So we've only looked at urban settlements of 500 population or more. As I said, that's 516 in Scotland, and these are grouping the settlements according to local authorities. So we've collected lots of data and then summarized that data according to local authorities. So if you're looking to rank local authorities across Scotland, according to, for example, their green space ground source heat capacity, this is the place to do it. And lots of interesting results from doing that, some of which I'll mention later. Next one, please, Lynn. Also in that spreadsheet, you'll find a settlement worksheet. and this lists all the settlements. Again, one of the issues with using the Scottish heat map was that it was using a data set of settlements that was 2013 from the National Records Office. So it wasn't the most up-to-date settlements data set. I think there's a 2016 version. So I know that that has cropped up as people have inquired, why isn't it using the latest version of the settlements? Well, that's because we were being consistent with the Scottish heat map, and we wanted to utilize some of the settlement data that they make available. So yes, there are going to be slight anomalies around the edges of settlements where new estates or new development has happened that isn't necessarily reflected in this data, but it was we wanted to be consistent with the Scottish heat map, so that's why we've used 2013 settlements. And you can see this array of information that summarizes, for example, again, using the version 2 of the Scottish heat map, the heat demand for all the buildings within those settlements, and all sorts of other data sets. We've utilized the home analytics data from EST to provide aggregated data for example, fuel poverty or SAP SAP scores. We've looked at the age of properties. So we've taken a number of key variables from home analytics and aggregated them according to up to the settlement level, and also then aggregated up to local authority. Next slide, please, Lynn. So what can you do with that sort of data? Well, without doing any real analysis, you can immediately start visualizing it through charts. So I can do a quick filter, in this case on a local authority. So we filtered all the settlements for the Scottish Borders Council area here. We've got I think about 28 settlements in Borders. And then we've graphed the data according to their suitability for using water source heat and ground source heat. So this is the ground source heat potential that these settlements offer in raw sort of kilowatt hour terms, with Peebles obviously top of the list there. In terms of the area available within Peebles for generating heat from their Greenspaces. But the percentages in the x-axis there actually tell you how much ground source heat is available in terms of meeting the total demand from each of those settlements. So you can see in Peebles' case, it can actually meet 100% of heat demand within Peebles' settlement as a whole. So very easy to start creating these sorts of graphs. The next one is Lynn, please. Yep, is for water source heat. So again, really striking. 23 of the 26 settlements there can meet 100% of their heat demands just from the rivers that run through the borders, largely due to their industrial heritage of being next to rivers for the water power, for powering the mills. So there is a real close association in the Borders area, as there is in actually many others. Murray would be another local authority that would show a similar sort of pattern for a very large percentage of heat demand that can be met from water source power. And indeed, Glasgow itself obviously wouldn't be a very good graph looking at Glasgow, given there's only one bar, but again, Glasgow has a huge potential from the Clyde to meet its water source potential, its heat demand potential. Next slide, please. And then we can look at other types of data as well that we're making available. So this is again, these are two graphs for the Scottish Borders Council settlements. Again, the top one is looking at the number of households, the percentage of households that are off the mains gas grid. So we've got 10 of those settlements with pretty significant proportions of greater than 30%, of households that are off gas. And again, we can graph data there for percentage of households in fuel poverty, and start making obvious quick assessments of proportions that have high levels of fuel poverty. So all of the indicators in the right hand side of the screen there are all data sets that we can graph and chart and map. So we've got that list: heat density, public building demand. We've got for each of these, we've generally got counts, percentages, and some form of high, medium, and low category. We've looked at proximity to the coast for the accessibility for using marine water source heat. We've looked at proximity to static water bodies. We've got fuel poverty, we talked about, households in social housing, households with in the least efficient, thermally efficient housing, the oldest housing, and we've even tried to do some quick analysis of whether or not you have an energy from waste plant in your settlement as well. Again, some of these data sets are available through the Scottish heat map, and that does make available heat supply sites. So we've looked at their data for heat supply points, and we think this data is a good complement to that. That data is sort of obviously being managed on an ongoing basis. So this data is really a snapshot to complement the data that is being made available through the Scottish heat map. Okay, next slide, please. So we reach the point here where we, instead of talking about the data that we're making available, it's how do we really use this data? And there are two sort of strands, effectively two ways of using it, and really the strategic left-hand side of the screen is what I would encourage you to be using it for now. It's really the priority, I think, as GHiGs comes along. We need to be trying to look at strategic uses of this data to understand and analyze the patterns of energy supply and demand, both at a national, regional, settlement, and neighborhood, and even down to individual building scale. So this is kind of where I see our priority, and Ruth is going to say a bit more about this as well in following. So this is the sort of whole area of energy master planning, and trying to work out what we can do in different parts of the territories that we manage, whether that's a distributed sort of portfolio of sites across the country, or whether it's a sort of concentration of sites within a particular territory. It allows us to identify and match up the heat supply with demand, and the data that we've made available is particularly around providing information about where other supply locations where you can get low carbon heat from, and potentially also where low carbon heat could be stored, as we talked about earlier, underground. And then moving on, it's around zoning and using this data in order to zone areas for particular solutions, and in particular around heat network suitability for zones. Alongside this overarching strategic perspective is a more tactical perspective, where we want to start looking at individual opportunities, and often these two areas do go in parallel. They're sort of parallel tracked, but I would like to think that actually the tactical approach is something that is done really post the strategic approach, and the tactical sort of approach is really about identifying particular opportunities. So we're looking at filtering long lists of sites down to creating short lists, and then looking to identify particular opportunities that are most viable, and then how we can take those particular opportunities forward. So our data does do this, particularly for green space sites, and we've used it in a number of cases for particular local authorities, Glasgow and Edinburgh particularly, to identify tactical opportunities within green space sites across their cities. It's definitely usable in that sense, but we'd like to think that the focus right now is on the strategic side. Okay, next slide, please, Lynn. So I won't go through all of these user case scenarios, but these are some of the classic questions that you might be thinking. So how do I decarbonize heat for my town, my local authority, or my neighborhood? Which settlements in my area might have the highest heat demand? Which have the highest heat density? Which offer the strongest potential for low carbon heat based on their density? How do I identify the public buildings that have the highest heat demand and that could be used potentially as anchor loads for a district heat network? What supply options have I got in a particular settlement? If many of the rural settlements, many of the smaller, more remote settlements we've identified in our 516 superset, many of them don't have many options for low carbon heat supply. What they do have is lots of green space, and often they have a river running through them as well. So one of the key findings from our work has been that green space and blue space are key heat supply options for smaller settlements, off gas grid settlements across Scotland, and it's those that often jump out as being the biggest opportunities. How much of the heat demand could be met by heat from urban blue and green spaces, and where are my strongest opportunities? The tactical question: where are they? Which green spaces might offer the potential for doing a project? All of these questions are things that our data can help to answer. Next one, please, Lynn. So as I said, we've got a spreadsheet type data that allows us to do national scale analysis using aggregated data for local authorities. We can rank data according to different variables. Next one, please, Lynn. This is looking at water source heat potential, again by local authority. Very quick for us to work out which local authorities have the strongest opportunities for water source heat according to this type of data. Next one, please, Lynn. And again, we can look at which settlements across Scotland have the greatest potential for sort of low regret solutions, what's called, for the air settlements that are off the gas grid. Fort William, interestingly, jumps out as the biggest settlement by some way in terms of its off gas grid number of households, with the others there you can see. So we've got the challenge of addressing some fairly sizable but remote towns that are not serviced by mains gas. Okay, next one, please, Lynn. So we can look at, in that case, we can look at the local authority or even the Scotland-wide scale, but we can then come down in scale to look at the regional scale. So this is a map of the Clyde Valley and trying to assess the potential of water source heat across the whole of the Clyde Valley from a master planning perspective. So we can map here the orange blobs of the areas of high heat demand. Not surprising given the industrial heritage, again, of the Clyde. To see so much of the heat clustered around the rivers, and it just purely from a spatial overview perspective, you can see the close matchups between heat demand and where the rivers are flowing. So it's good to be able to look at this sort of scale of data. Okay, next one. And then we can look more at a local authority scale. So we can start looking at profiling particular local authorities. So we did a profile, some work with Perth and Kinross. They've got 35 settlements. That's their sort of annual heat demand according to the Scottish heat map for all of those settlements, and the split between urban and rural, where Perth ranks as a town in terms of all the settlements, which ones are classed as high in terms of their potential for heat networks, which ones are classed as high for their potential for river source heat. Again, very significant in Perth and Kinross. A lot of the towns have major rivers flowing through them. So quite easy to use this data for profiling local authorities at a scale of the settlements within them. Okay, next one. And this is another bit of work we did with City of Edinburgh Council. Again, similar sort of profile, understanding the data for the local authority, and then showing it mapped in terms of the density of heat demand, which is the red shaded areas there, with high heat demand across the city, and the distribution of rivers and green space respective to that. So yeah, I'll leave that one there. Next one, please, Lynn. It's another one of Edinburgh. Again, this time showing major, the red dots are the points of major heat supply locations. So they're existing large heat supply potential locations or projects that are currently producing low carbon heat in relation to rivers and green space across the city. And the next one, please, Lynn. I think this is just the again, showing the linear heat density model. So this is one of the linear heat density zones that we mentioned earlier. Again, showing the pattern of heat demand across the city, and the challenges of addressing this perhaps with a district heat network, and how you might route a district heat network to take in those areas with the highest heat demand. Okay, next one, please. Right, pass over to Ruth now, because this slide fits in very neatly with the previous one.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so we've seen a range of different types of data that we can get from the GHiGs outputs, and how you can use those to provide information to develop your strategic thinking about decarbonising an area or a region. So I'm now going to talk about how you can connect that kind of strategic vision through to an energy master plan, and then down to delivery of specific projects, and how the GHiGs data could play a role in all of those stages. So I mean, as an energy consultant, my team at Ramboll spend a lot of time supporting clients through these phases of taking a strategic vision that might be reaching net zero, or prioritising sorting out fuel poverty in certain areas, and then developing that into an energy master plan. So thinking about what the optimum use of the resources are in an area, and how they should be focused into projects, and then taking those projects within a master plan through feasibility phases and design through to final delivery. And the way you see it goes along the following lines. So you take that strategic vision and you consider what opportunities are there in an area, and you take all of these layers, and then you can weigh them up against each other and say, well, what's the best use of these resources to meet my strategic priorities? And that will start to inform how you would create a specific energy master plan, setting out, ideally, again, in a spatial way, what you see as those optimum opportunities across your area and how they might interconnect. And then from there, you can identify projects within that master plan that are your priority for delivery, that might be expanded, and they can be interconnected over time to deliver that area-wide vision. So that project may be just a small subsection of that whole area, but it's taking place and it's being developed in that wider context. So future proofing can take place, or the design can be done in a way that's easier to interconnect in the future, etc. So I've got 3 examples here of district heating energy master plans, which are obviously particularly relevant here for our green heat and blue and heat from blue and green spaces, to help us visualize what you might be aiming for. So this is an example on this slide of district heating energy master plan that Ramboll created for the city of Edinburgh. You'll probably seen it many times. It's been around for quite a lot of years, but over the years it's developed and refined as more information comes online and things develop. So the key things in this energy master plan are showing the key anchor loads, where their heat demand sits across the city, areas with high fuel poverty, where there are planned developments or new builds going up. Existing heat networks are also really important to consider, existing projects, and then other potential heat sources like mine workings, and then of course there's green space assets that could be used as potential heat supply, and that's where the GHiGs data has informed this. And then based on all of these things, there's a proposed district heating route. And obviously this is at a city scale network. It's a vision for the city that would refine over time. But with that vision in place, where projects are being developed, then that provides an evidence base for project developers and for city energy planners to be able to coordinate and bring the right people together to lay the foundations for that city scale network that will offer the maximum benefits for the city. So the lowest cost heat, the most resilient heat, enabling multiple different sources of renewable energy to come on, and minimizing peaks in electricity demands, etc. Next slide, please, Lynn. Thanks. So a couple more examples of energy master plans. So I think we've missed one actually. Is there one slide back, Lynn? Okay, don't worry, we'll go forward. This one is it's actually a kind of very basic baseline of an energy master plan that it was done for Falkirk. So this was done as part of a project for Scottish Enterprise, where they were looking to map the low carbon heat opportunities of key cities and regions across Scotland, just to understand where there are opportunities and potential. And there's just a focus on these slides on Falkirk and Perth, because we've and John has done quite a lot of work with those local authorities and pulled out examples from them. So it's just the building blocks in this one. There's the key anchor loads. There are some where the green spaces, where the mine waters exist, where developments are taking place, and of course in Falkirk, industrial process heat potential. And there isn't yet a network drawn on this. That's still at an early stage, but by having this plan baseline in the background, it means that as projects maybe become identified, there's a bigger picture available to inform how that project might think about where it might fit in the wider low carbon energy system of Falkirk in the future. Next slide, please. So one more example of an energy master plan from Perth, and again taking the key heat demands, and this one showing slightly more clearly where there's potential for use of green space and blue space for low carbon heat generation, and then a indicative heat network to connect up those key loads, and just thinking about how that might work. And I know that this was done at a very high level as a first pass a while ago, and I know that Perth and Kinross Council have more specific plans and have developed this, but just to kind of illustrate the basic building blocks that you need to inform an energy master plan, you're weighing up where your priority are, you're thinking about what resources you have available and how they might match up best. Next slide, please, Lynn. And this just brings you down to a much more detailed level to think about what outputs you might get from the GHiGs data that you could then use it within your energy planning. So here's an example that Perth and Kinross Council have done using the GHiGs data. So the blue lines show where there's highest linear heat density. The red show a kind of medium level of linear heat density around key anchor loads. And then the red stars show potential anchor loads with large heat demands. And then finally, you've got green spaces and where there's potential or high potential for use of a ground source heat pump. And so you can just imagine now a very basic kind of interconnection of those key anchor loads, following where there is a high linear heat density and drawing renewable heat from where there are available sources. And it's all about that coincidence of the key indicators to help you think about spatially what might happen in your area. Next slide, please. And then one other example using GHiGs data. So the Lunkerty area of Perth and Kinross was thinking about low regret settlements. And in this case, that was an off-gas settlement. So they identified settlements or neighbourhoods across the area where there was a high percentage of off mains gas grid. And then, so this is one of those in Lunkerty. They've mapped all the buildings and their heat demand, a subset of any publicly owned assets that might provide a kind of security to enable a network to get over a line in terms of feasibility and risk management. And then create that heat map of heat demand with the public buildings and all the buildings all together, and identify where there are potential low carbon heat sources to meet that demand. And then there are software tools. So here we talked about Consof or Thermos are two potential options where they can actually then optimize a route for a network. So you're building that energy master plan to a slightly more refined level. What's the best route for that network? And again, you've got that vision for the area, so you can think, how do I deliver that then? Do I need to phase the development? Can I do it in one step, etc.? Next slide, please. And then I'm coming back to John's strategy versus tactics. So in my mind, the way it works is you have your strategy, you have your energy master plan, which gets very specific about that strategic vision for the area, where projects will be delivered. And then you get to a project level and you think, what are the best tactics to deliver that vision? And that can come from lots of different perspectives. So you might be in a parks department of a local authority thinking about, well, how can I create energy generation projects using the green space, or what role can parks play in my area's low carbon energy system? And that's okay. So you can use the GHiGs data in that level too. So here's an example of, so that's again looking at the whole of Perth and Kinross, where are the green spaces, and then zooming in on specific green spaces, the GHiGs data will show you what the heat generation potential might be of that area, what the heat demand in the area is, and whether there's any particularly public buildings which may be considered that little bit easier to make a first project out of. But again, you'd ideally connect that back to your bigger strategic energy master plan and go, okay, if there was a project here, how would that sit with the wider vision for the area and how might that support that? Next slide, please. So a couple more examples like that. So this is an example in Falkirk where you've got a green space, and you can just see that where there is a coincidence between the green space with heat generation potential, the heat demand around it where there's a higher linear heat density, and then where the black dotted line kind of indicates a 500-meter buffer around the green space. So you don't want to go too far from that green space because it will get very expensive to transport heat over that distance. So where there's that coincidence of the two together, you've got maybe a project opportunity that starts worth looking at in more detail. Next slide, please. Yeah, and that's kind of project level shortlisting is something that you can do with the GHiGs data as well. So you can see here kind of rankings by of green spaces. I think that's for City of Edinburgh from the looks of it, and then equally at a settlement scale, the water source heat pump potential, kind of ranking them high, medium, low potential. Next slide, please, Lynn. And then one final kind of project, green space led project. So this is again from City of Edinburgh, where looking at Inch Park, which is kind of the horticultural centre in City of Edinburgh, where lots of plants are growing, and so as you can see here, there's a large green space with a large heat demand in a building right within the green space. So you can see there's almost like a very nice standalone project, and you can see the level of detail that's been produced for every green space within the GHiGs data. So you can see the size of the data, the potential for its heat generation, if there's any water source heat generation within that area, in that settlement area, the heat demand of public buildings and nearby buildings. And yeah, I guess just to say that, you're looking at this project level, that's great. It looks like quite an interesting project that's worth taking forward into maybe exploring its feasibility. But what you ideally do is then go back to that energy master plan and think, how does this fit into this wider picture? And how do I design this project to enable maybe interconnection or expansion as the opportunities arise? So yeah, if that's the kind of thing you're looking for, you can get that extra support to use the GHiGs data to help explore those things with your energy teams or with the parks teams, etc. I think that's everything, John. I'll pass back to you.
Thanks very much, Ruth. That's great. Yeah, next one, please, Lynn. So just to quickly go through these, because I'm aware of the time, and I want to give Simon a little bit of time to take you through the Spatial hub work that they've done. There's a couple of slides here on sort of practical issues around using the data. So we've released most of the data under an open government license, so you can free to use it. The GIS data is available through the improvement service, and you have to be a public sector body in order to access that. So but of course, if you are a contractor for a public sector body, then you can still get access to it for the period of your project. And yeah, it can be basically downloaded from either from the GHiGs website, where the data is available publicly, or it can be downloaded through the Spatial Data Hub. So managing the data, as I said, it's available Scotland-wide. Some of the data sets, as Ruth was saying there, are quite high resolution data, and therefore they get very large, particularly the green space data. So if you're wanting to take local copies of, for example, let's say Hugh wanted to take a local copy of the green space data for the whole of Fife, that is still going to be a very large data set. And Simon may talk about some ways of addressing that. But you need to be aware that you need plenty of storage space for doing that, and ways of accessing it successfully, and also ways of storing it and sharing it on your local systems. So just be aware that the large volume, all this data centrally. So sorry, next one, Lynn, please. Thank you. What are the data quality issues? Well, we've tried to document some of the issues that we've faced with data quality, but the key thing to be aware of is this was a one-off funded project over a space of time of around about 9 months. It had a small project team. Relatively budget-wise, it was a small project. So we've done our utmost to put time and effort into addressing data quality issues. We have checked the data. It's not been released without any checking. I've spent a lot of my time looking at data issues and making sure that what we're releasing is as comprehensive and accurate as possible. You know, there have been a number of issues that have been identified. Again, talking to the local authority yesterday about this around the Scottish heat map version 2, which some of you will be aware of. So we are using that version of the data. So I know there are various sort of hot fixes that Scottish Government are looking to apply to it to improve it. So it does reflect the release that we've used. And right now, there isn't a plan for updating the data that we've made available. It's not part of the Scottish heat map data management planning strategy. So it is a sort of snapshot release of this data as a one-off. That said, I don't really see a lot of dynamism in the data. So I don't see that it goes out of date within 6 months in any way. So I think it is reasonable that this data should be of use and of value over the coming few years without too many issues about the data. Certainly some of the linear heat density modeling, some of the issues being raised about the Scottish heat map, like how it deals with flatted properties, high-rise properties, where you've got multiple stacked data points on top of each other. They don't come through, those properties don't come through in the linear heat density models that we've created because of that issue. And we are currently looking at how we can come up with a method for aggregating those points to specific buildings using a GIS methodology that we're working through with Perth and Kinross. So there's various issues that we're aware of that are reflected because of the data sources that we've used. We have sought throughout this project to work with the local authority LHE's sort of working group. And we've talked to Zero Waste Scotland throughout this project, trying to ensure that the standards that they're adopting for LHEs through their own consultants are consistent with the data approaches that we've used. So we hope that the approach that we used is consistent with the sort of methodology that hopefully in the fairly near future they'll make available to local authorities. The public data that we've identified, the public building data, we know is a best approximation based on the OS coding. We know there are issues there. It isn't totally accurate by any means, but it was the best available that we could do in the time. So just bear that in mind. And yeah, there are issues with water source heat potential. We've aggregated rivers in settlements, looking at the total flow rates of rivers going through a settlement. If that settlement, like Edinburgh or Glasgow, has got multiple major rivers, Aberdeen is another one, then we haven't tried to segregate the data according to specific river segments. That wasn't something that we could do with the data that we had available. So the River Kelvin, for example, going through Glasgow, is not treated in any different way to the River Clyde going through Glasgow, and we've effectively aggregated the potential of both of those rivers. That's not ideal, and it would be nice if there was a way of disaggregating those to demonstrate the potential of the different rivers that go through our settlements. Okay, next one, please, Lynn. And yep, talked about access. That's the link to the GHiGs webpage. And Simon is going to tell you more about the Spatial Data Hub. So, Simon, next one, Lynn, please. Yeah.
Hi there. Thanks for that, John. Yeah, so I'm going to give you a quick intro to the Spatial Hub, but I thought I should just give you a quick introduction to the improvement service for those of you that don't know who we are. We're a company, essentially, but we're owned by the 32 local authorities, as well as Costler and Solis. We've been around for about 15 or 16 years now, and everything we do is about working with local government to improve their services. And as you might imagine, a lot of those services are now data and digital projects. So I work in a team called Data and Intelligence, and I will now take you through the origins of the Spatial Hub and explain how we got to it. Next slide, Lynn. Okay, so the basic origins of the Spatial Hub are all to do with the successes that we made of the One Scotland Gazetteer, which is basically Scotland's national address and street register. So back about 17, 18 years ago, every one of the local authorities were essentially creating and collecting address data in their own bespoke manner. So whenever you wanted to look at that in a national context, it was quite difficult to package up 32 different varieties of address data. But the Scottish Government recognised this, and we got some funding to invest in modernising things like the address data for Scotland. So we took the British national standards around addressing data, and we turned that into a Scottish convention. We set up a network of experts in each of the local authorities, and we built a very valuable national address data set. And Ordnance Survey recognised that was really a crucial part of the infrastructure for the country, and we entered into a partnership with them to essentially commercialise address data. What that meant is that we had a revenue return coming back to local government that we could invest in bigger and better things. So, next slide, Lynn. As well as the successes made of the Gazetteer, which we wanted to replicate with the Spatial Hub, we also had a bunch of geospatial initiatives that came around at the same sort of time. We had a national strategy for geospatial data between 2006 and 2011 that basically indicated we should be doing things better in a more joined up manner. We had the Ordnance Survey One Scotland Mapping Agreement, which gave us the ability to share Ordnance Survey data for doing bigger and better things, and the GHiGs data has sort of proven that the success that has been made of those sorts of initiatives. We also had a stick of sorts. The EU Inspire Directive was passed into Scottish law in about 2009, and basically what that dictated was every public sector body should be standardizing the way that they share data online, and that was one of the key drivers for the Spatial Hub, building a set of standards through which we could publish things like the GIS data that John has been explaining earlier. There was also the McClellan report in 2011, which was all around better digital services and better digital products for Scotland. Next slide, Lynn. So it was very apparent to us that we needed to build on all of this. So in 2014, we conducted an audit across all of the local authorities in Scotland, and it suggested there were up to about 70 to 100 data sets that were roughly generic across the 32 councils. So At that point in time, with the money we were receiving from the commercialization of Address Space, our boss set up a team, the Spatial Information Service, of topic specialists, technical specialists, and we set up the Spatial Hub, and we built a technology stack that all fitted together and did different aspects of improving data for local government. And just recently, in 2017 onwards, we've expanded the Spatial Hub and begun to improve the data. And as you've seen in the talk today, it's not just about local authority data now. We're publishing national data sets from all sorts of bodies, including health and social care and utilities data. And the Spatial Hub has been built so it can sort of scale up to do whatever people want it to do. Next slide, Lynn. So I mentioned Inspire earlier as being one of the big drivers for the Spatial Hub. It was an EU directive, it is in Scottish law, and we're all expected to sort of adhere to it. But it is quite a complex piece of legislation, but when you boil it down to its constituent elements, all it really talks about is making data findable on the internet, so that's the discovery part, using metadata, and then enabling anyone to be able to view the data, to preview it, to see if they want to actually access it, and then enabling a sort of download capability. And not just download like an Excel spreadsheet off a web page, but looking at better ways of consuming data. John was talking about the size of the data that he's making available through the Spatial Hub. Quite often it's very cumbersome to take a massive data set like that and store it locally. So what we've been able to do is build APIs that enable your GIS systems to connect directly to the data, so that it makes it a bit easier. Next click, Lynn. So what we did with the Spatial Hub, already in Scotland, the Scottish Government have built what they call the Scottish Spatial Data Infrastructure for metadata. And what that is, it's a search engine optimized platform. So if you structure the data well, whenever anyone is looking for data using Google, just typing in keywords, more often than not, they should be able to find it if you've done this well through the SSDI. And the Spatial Hub meets the view and the download components of Inspire. So the actual physical act of getting hold of the data and interacting with it. And we built a connection between the SSDI and the Spatial Hub, so that all of this stuff sort of links together seamlessly and creates an interoperable sort of network of data for Scotland. Next slide, Lynn. So what that metadata component means, if you publish data in this way using standardized metadata, next click, Lynn, we can take the structured metadata and publish it to any web page we want. So we pull it into the Spatial Hub web page, next click, Lynn. The Spatial Hub, the metadata from the SSDI also feeds into data.gov.uk at the United Kingdom level, so it can be found there. Next click, Lynn. And before Brexit happened, there was also a download of that data.gov.uk data into the EU geoportal. So any member state in Europe could be easily finding this data. And it just sort of shows that when you do things in a more standardized manner using metadata, all of a sudden it allows so many more opportunities. Next click, Lynn. And we've certainly seen that with the data sets that we make available on the Spatial Hub. Even though we're not making all of our data openly available, because there is metadata out there on the internet, people are finding our data sets all the time. This is a graph just showing you the sort of commercial sectors that have been approaching us for data over the past 3 or 4 years. And you can see various big ones there standing out, like information traders and land and property specialists, but also up to 20 energy providers have been approaching us for data. Next click, Lynn. And in terms of the actual accessibility of the data, the people who have access to the data, these are the sorts of hit rates that you can expect to see. So the top line there are our open data sets, and you can see that by making data truly open, you get so many more hits than when you restrict it. However, because we are seeking additional funding to make the Spatial Hub a sustainable solution, We haven't managed to make all of our data sets fully open as yet, but we're hopeful that that will happen, and you will see so many more innovative uses of this data as we push more and more of it out in standardized ways. Next slide, Lynn. And in the wider context, Inspire was great. It's been around for 13, 14 years. It's fair to say, I think, that it hasn't really been openly embraced by everyone, but there are other data principles that are now out there and being talked about at length. The key one that came out of the academic data community was something called FAIR, and people have started adding an extra letter onto FAIR, calling it QFAIR, the Q being quality. But Inspire was really no different to these FAIR data principles. It's all about making data findable, making data accessible, making it interoperable, making it reusable. And alongside those letters here, I've just shown you an example of the sorts of technologies that we're using in the Spatial Hub to meet each of these data principles. And most of these are open source products that anyone can use to be doing this stuff, and many local authorities will use them. And you've also got the licensing tools that enable us to share data more widely. But I want to sort of drill down on the quality element directly, especially because John spoke about it earlier. Quality is a real issue for all of us, particularly in local government. So next slide, Lynn. I just want to talk about that in a bit more detail and why we have specific issues with quality. So over the 5 years that I've been working on the Spatial Hub, we've been trying to sort of get to the bottom of why we have so many issues with local government data particularly. And thinking about it in the context of the way the policy cycle should work with it in a national context. A government is voted in on a manifesto of great ideas, things that they want to be able to deliver for the country, and that turns into key policy and legislation. And funding and resourcing and strategies will be put into that particular policy. It will then be passed on to either a government agency or a local government to initiate and provide the policy or the service to the citizens. Now, the big issue we have is that policies are not dictating anything to do with data or standards or guidance or anything like that. There may be a line that says a policy delivery body might have to provide a notification when something changed back to policy, but essentially we've got a break in the cycle if ever we want to do any analytics of whether a policy has achieved what it set out to do in the first place. And really what you see with the Gazetteer and the Spatial Hub is a bit of a sticking plaster to retrospectively make sense of the policies that have been created. So what we're trying to do is build that evidence cycle back to the policy people to say, well, yes, this is working, or no, this isn't working, or perhaps we need to tweak things accordingly. Have I got
Simon,
John?
we're running out of time, Simon. So
okay.
sorry, I know you've got lots more slides, but can you wrap it up in the next minute, please?
Yeah, will do. Okay, next couple of slides, Lynn. Just go through that one. That's just explaining why we have those issues with policy. What it leads to, the lack of the sort of data around the policy is unstructured data. So that's what we're having to make a big stab at sorting out, that unstructured data. The Gazetteer is a good example of structured data, which is excellent. Next slide, Lynn. And keep going through this slide until I tell you to stop. Okay, so what you see with the GHiGs project is a good example of good data governance, which leads to better data quality. When people understand that they have a key responsibility for doing data well, then quality improves. And we have various people in national government that have a role for improving data governance and responsibility. What we want to see more of is identifying those people within local government structures, both at the senior hierarchy and the operational level, connecting those people together so that they understand where they sit in this data governance for doing things well. The GHiGs project is a good example of why data governance needs to be good, pulling people with a responsibility for improving heat supply in their local authorities, and pulling together and using the data better and knowing where they sit in that cycle. Next slide, Len. I think it's perhaps the last one. So yeah, just to explain, we started off as the Spatial Information Service. We're now Data and Intelligence within the Improvement Service. Everything we do is from our strategic framework and our business plan, but we're more than happy to work with anyone that wants to improve the way they do data better. Thanks, John. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Simon. Sorry to rush you.
No,
I'm aware of time, but Lynn, could we just zip through the last one so we've got a little bit of time for Q&A at the end? Just two more from me. So just some summary remarks on our project. I think we've made a very good sort of strong case for the importance of looking strategically at our sort of heat supply and demand situation, and how we can move from where we are right now to a more decarbonized situation, and the importance of looking at things, taking a step back and looking at things strategically rather than necessarily trying to pick out projects. I think that the contribution that the project has made is not just in the data that it's made available, but particularly in terms of trying to support the development of strategic processes in how data is developed and then managed, analyzed, and then made available to a wider audience. So I think I'm as proud of the sort of process that we've gone through with the project as much as I am with some of the outputs that we've achieved, and I think it has highlighted a number of anomalies. These have come out. You know, we've identified that North Queensferry is there was something really weird going on in North Queensferry that linked to the huge heat density that was to do with perhaps probably the aquarium there. And that came out because we've analysed all the data at settlement level, and it's not surprising that anomalies come out when you start analysing data. It is a snapshot, as I said, so it isn't part necessarily of the heat map management process at present. But we've talked about the timeliness of the data. I think it's really important that we've looked at urban settlements. I think settlements is a really good geography for looking at the strategic sort of heat challenges that we face, and I think it could be you know, really critical one. That's what most people are sort of wanting us to look at. I would have thought is what's happening in my town, and how is it going to impact on me living in perhaps a suburb or the periphery of the town, not necessarily in the centre of the town, and what are the options that are available to me. So yeah, let's look at whole towns and how we're going to decarbonize whole towns, not just looking at decarbonizing the centre of towns or cities and just those buildings with the highest heat demand. Yep, I'm really pleased how much we've been able to release the data Scotland-wide and the agreement that we've got. But of course, there are still areas of research that I think are needed. One of the gaps is around understanding land that is publicly owned, and we still don't have a very good understanding of land that is publicly owned because we don't have a complete land register, unfortunately. And I see that as a major sort of flaw in all of this. And if we did, it would make this work a lot easier. So very much encouraging people to try and complete their land register. I think there's opportunities to use these solutions in other green spaces like front gardens, and doing an analysis of the access to front gardens, perhaps for ground source heat. And also looking at grey spaces, because we can put things underground under grey spaces. It costs a bit more, but sometimes it makes sense to put some of these types of solutions in car parks, for example, because they're often co-located with buildings. So again, we didn't look at grey spaces at all as part of this project. And we talked about distinct river segments within cities. And of course, you know, we've done a very superficial job at looking at proximity to static water bodies and the sea as sort of potential heat supply resources, assets, and again, we could look in a lot more detail at those assets and the enormous potential for so many of our towns and cities that are located on the coast to utilise the marine environment for heat supply as well. Last one, Lynn. The key document on the GHiGs website is called the GHiGs Data Guide. If you have any key questions about how you can use the data, who you can pass it to, how you get access to it, and indeed what do all the different data sets mean, what are all the different attributes on all the different data, all the codes that we've used. This is all documented in the data guide, and it's just publicly available on the website. So do go there if you have any key questions. We've tried to document as much as possible. If there's anything missing, then do come back to me. We have literally a few minutes left. I'm sorry for constraining the amount of time we have for Q&A. It's taken longer than we expected. So I don't know, I know my colleagues have been monitoring the chat function. I don't think there's a lot of questions that have come up so far, but Ruth, I think you were going to keep half an eye on it, and if there was anything for the four of us, then we could answer.
Yeah, I'm not gonna, because I know we're short on time. I think it'd just be really nice to hear from Hugh and or anyone else who wants to say what advice they would have to people who are just starting out using the GHiGs data. Where might you get access to advice, Hugh? And then to John, how, when we're thinking about different types of heat supply, we're having a nice conversation and the other day about this, you know, is there a heat hierarchy? How do we think about across a city what types of heat we use where? So Hugh, I'll try in a one-liner. What would you say?
So just, I guess, think about who in your authority works with data and who has an interest in this sort of area, really. And just that, for me, that's the structural background of all the people who are doing it. I think that's a really good place to start, and doing an LHES, the local heat energy efficiency strategy, and thinking through that process is a good way of giving everyone a reason to come together around that. So the GIS people, the data people in housing or in assets, or all those different areas. So it gives you a place to sort of bring that group together and then start thinking about that data, and resources like the improvement service are just invaluable to this sort of thing. So there's a lot of people out there who can help you think through that.
Great, so reach out to those people. John, what are your thoughts on the heat supply priority?
In terms of heat supply, I sort of came to this conclusion fairly sort of down the line in terms of my my ParkPower work, that taking heat out of the ground at present, in fact, using heat pumps and district heat networks right now financially is, I hate to say it, but it's largely unviable. So all the work that we've done and the sort of evidence that we've developed here, many of the potential projects, financially speaking, are not viable right now, and that is because there isn't a policy framework to support them. And that policy framework is largely dictated from the UK Westminster government. And we are still waiting for the UK to publish what's called the Heat and Building Strategy, which we're very hopeful that will clarify the policy context and allow some clarity over whether or not there is going to be support made available to projects like this to enable them to happen. Because without additional incentives right now, these types of projects are moving away from gas effectively, are incredibly financially challenging. So we can do all the strategizing that we want to do and come up with fantastically great strategies. But at the end of the day, you do a feasibility or a business case study to assess the viability of this of a project, and ultimately it doesn't stack up, and that's incredibly frustrating for all of us on the call, and many of you listening who'll be aware of that. So we desperately need some policy framework here that will make it. Ground source heat is very challenging. Drilling boreholes is expensive, and sometimes it isn't necessarily the highest heat supply priority, or sort of highest up the pecking order in terms of heat supply sort of assets that you would use. There is a pecking order right now, and the fact that the Shorefare project in Midlothian is happening on the edge of Edinburgh, utilising a waste incineration plant to provide heat to buildings around that is no great surprise, because that is probably the top of the pecking order in terms of using a high temperature heat source. There are others, and probably water source is further up that pecking order, and ground source is probably further down the pecking order. But as I said, it shouldn't negate the fact that there are many settlements across Scotland that face natural and physical reality that they don't have these higher pecking order heat sources, and therefore they need to utilize their green spaces and their blue spaces and every other space, frankly, in order to work out how they can decarbonize their heat supply.
Thanks, John.
Can I just come in on that point? I think that what I was trying to explain with the data driving the policy cycle in my talk is what we're sort of talking about here, providing an evidence base to show policymakers the art of the possible. And the crucial thing we need to get better at as data practitioners is telling stories through data and really taking people on a journey and sell the art of the possible.
Thanks, Simon. That's a nice positive ending to kind of John's kind of point about policy and how these kind of strategic plans and energy master plans can form the evidence base to drive policy in the direction we need for a efficient low carbon energy system. I'm aware of the time, and so I'm just going to say a massive thank you to John for being a real visionary with his work on the green heat, green spaces, the ParkPower projects over the years. It's been a real, again, driving force in this conversation around the role of green and blue spaces, and yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to work with you, John, and so thanks very much for that. I'll hand back to you to close up.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Ruth, and it's been good all round working with all of you, and probably many of you on the call, to develop this project, taking it from ParkPower through working with specific local authorities on sites. We're doing some really interesting stuff in North Lanarkshire with the country park right now, looking at some big ParkPower potential opportunities. So I hope this is the start of a big chapter, rather than it sort of finishing here, because you know, we've got some massive challenges, as Hugh has pointed out, to achieve what the Scottish Government has asked us to achieve, and we need to utilise all the resources that we have available and try and use the best data we can possibly use to tell the story that Simon has definitely suggested is the way to do it. So the more pressure we can put using data on our decision makers and policy makers, as far as I'm concerned, the better. So thanks all for joining this session. Sorry we compressed the questions. We have recorded this, so thanks for staying on with the call, and thanks to all my colleagues who've fed into the project over the last few years. It's been a really rewarding one to work in. Thank you so much.